Hello everyone, in this new tutorial of AngularJS and ASP.NET Core. So today we'll see how to make sign up form. So let's continue on the last project. So first of all we need to install Bootstrap package. So let's launch the command npm install bootstrap. It will take the last release package. It will be 4.3.1. So now in the Angular.json file we need to import the CSS file in the style node and the CSS .gs, the bootstrap.min.js. Yeah. Now let's create a new two folders, models and services, which contain the data model and the services of the application. So let's clear the console and let's create a new folder here, which called menu, will contain the navigation bar component and the footer component. Let's navigate to src/app/menu and let's generate the navigation bar component. So ng generate component which called nav bar. Here we can see all the generated file. Let's navigate to the navbar component.html file. At the same time, we'll navigate to the Bootstrap for website in order to see the different navigation bar. So here Bootstrap for navbar, and we can have some symbols. So let's choose one, copy and paste it. Yeah. Let's launch the server, ngserve open, compiling the project, and we'll launch this in the browser. So now we need to delete all the code in the app component.html, and let's copy the app navbar selector and we call this directive in the app component.html. So here the app component is the parent page in which we'll call all the children component. So let's delete some items here and make some modification. We'll need a sign up and sign in items in the navigation bar. So here we have the sign in. Delete this portion of code, and the sign up, I think we need to switch it because sign in is more useful than sign up. So here we have our navigation bar. Let's make some aligning to the right using ML O2 class and rename the navbar to forms title site. Great. Now let's open a new terminal, and here we need to navigate to src app folder, and we'll generate a sign up component. So ng generate component sign up. Let's navigate to the sign up folder, and let's open the sign up component HTML, delete this code, and at the same time we need to create a user data model. So we can say it's the view model and the ASP, MVC or WPF application. So here we have a model that represents the user. So in order to generate it, we use ngGenerate class user model. And we have to define the same schema of the user model in the C#. So simply we can take the same property, name and types. Here we have an ID. It will be a number type, first name, last name, an email, password, and mobile number. And it will be simply case. All this property will be string. So if you don't have the same schema in the C# and the TS file, so JSON cannot convert or transfer the data between the two classes, WebAPI and Angular site web. So that's why we have to define the same name. So in the sign up component.ts, we need to import some packages. We find the Angular common Angular Forms. So we'll use Forms Builder, Forms Group, and Validator. So the Form Builder, it's a service that we can inject it in the construction in order to generate a list of a group, and inside these groups we can generate which called a control. So here we need to import also the user model type. So model/user model class, and it will be the user model class. We can see that our sign up component implements on init hooks. So in order to initialize the properties, we have to do it in the ng onInit method. It's not recommended to make initialization in the constructor. So here we add the sign up form that will represent our form, which contain last name, first name, email, etc. And it will be a type of form group. So in the constructor, we need to add a parameter, private form builder, type of form builder, and this form builder will permit the generation of reactive form. So the sign up form, it will be equal to the form builder injected in the constructor dot group, and in this group we'll define our control. It will represent simply the fields. So here we have the last name, the first name, etc. And we have to define the validator rules. So here all the fields are required except the email is a special case. We have to define two validator. So we have to say that the user have to type validate email string, and also the email is a required field. The same thing in the password. We have to define a minimum of length of password for security reasons. For example, we say 12. Yeah, that's great. 12. It's difficult to hack it. and we'll say also that this password is required. Eventually we can make a custom validator using regular expressions, etc. So we see it in another tutorial. And finally we have a mobile number. We'll say simply it's a required field, but in reality the mobile number we have to check it or to validate it, switch country, mobile number type. And let's expose a getter. It will be sign up form data. This getter will be used in the validator HTML side. So we'll expose it now and we'll use it in the next tutorial. That's great. Now let's navigate to the sign up component and let's make our form. So let's use the form directive, and in this form we need to define the labels and the inputs. So we can use div.form group. It's a very nice shortcut in Visual Studio Code. Yeah, so we need to make the directive dot the class, and Visual Studio Code will generate the code. So here we have a label and an input. So the label for last name, for example, first name, and we'll use some, let's say here the text, it will be first name, and we'll use some CSS classes Bootstrap. Let's say call form label and call sm2. So here we'll not explain the CSS classes, is not the objective of this tutorial, but you can see in the Bootstrap site web all the definition of the signification of this CSS classes. So in the input we need to type the type, it will be text, and we have to use the form controller type directive in order to make the data binding between the code behind and the HTML view. So we need to define in the app routing model the paths. So that's why we need to import a sign up component, and in the root array we'll define the path of this view of, or we can say the path of this component. So here we have the path sign up, for example, and I think it will be curly braces, yeah, and here we have the component side. So in the navigation bar we need to define the router link in which this sign up, that's mean when the user click on this item, it will be redirected to the sign up route. It will be the sign up component, and in order to activate this dynamically search mapping route, we have to use router outlet in the app component HTML. Let's launch the server, and here I think we have a problem. Yeah, I can't parse the template. Okay, so that's great. No problem. Yeah, we have an injection problem. So I think we have forgotten to import Reactive Forms module in the app model .ts. Yeah, and here reactive form module, and in the imports array we need to add it also. That's great. So for this form we need to use the directive form group, bind it to the sign up form property in the code behind. And here, yeah, we can see our first field. So in the same way, let's duplicate this field 4 times for other properties, and let's say is the last name. And form controller last name. So the form group directive, it's for binding with which form group in the code behind, and the form controller, it will be the data binding between the form group dot the controller defined in this group. So it will be something dynamically data binding. So in the same way, I'll make all other fields except the password. We need to change the type in order to make the password not visible. So here we have all fields. So let's make some design here, make this formula more beautiful. We'll use something called a card in the Bootstrap. Eventually, you can see the different type of card on the website of Bootstrap. So here we'll define the card and define the header and the body, and after that it will be the footer of this card. It will contain the register button. So let's make div.card header. Enter. Yeah, that's great. And let's use H3 directive, and let's say it's sign up simply. And let's make this header centered. That's cool. Now we'll use some, it's not the right place, the background color, and it will be only on the header, BG primary. So this color is defined in the Bootstrap, so you can see it in the website. A different class, primary, secondary, alert, warning, etc. So let's change the card body to card semicolon body, and let's use text align to the right. So let's align all the labels to the right. And finally, the mobile number. That's cool. So now we need to resize this card by 50%. Yeah, and make it to the center. So let's use MX Auto. Cool. And now we need to center all the fields. So we can use deflex classes justify content center, align item center. So eventually you can find all the signification of all this in the Bootstrap website. That's cool. That looks nice. And finally we need to add the button. So we need to add a div with card footer class and the button class btn primary, and the margin on the right by 1 pixels. And let's define the content to sign up. Yeah, that's cool. I think we have spelling mistakes here. So if you have spelling mistakes in the data binding, that will not work, and you can see in the browser console directly the error. So here we need to define the ng submit events and submit method, and let's navigate to sign up component on submit method and define it the onSubmit method. So first of all, you need to check if the formula is valid. So if the formula is invalid, so we don't need to go far. We make a return, and in the next tutorial you see how to make a single call. We have to block the button when the user click on the register after the validation of all the formula eventually. So now we need to get the data from the WebAPI. That's why we need to create a new service which called user service. So let's use the command ng generate service and the user service. And let's navigate to the user service file, and let's make the register user method. So this method will take one parameter. It will be the user model, type of user model class, and we need to import the HTTP package in order to use HttpClient. So the HTTP client permit the call of backend web API by it's like HTTP client in the C#, so we can make the get, the put, the post, etc. All the verbs of web API. And we need to import eventually the user model. So here in the constructor, so here in the register user, we need to define the parameter, and in the constructor we need to inject the HTTP client like a service. So HTTP client, type of HTTP client class, and we need to make it a private, yes. And now we can define our HTTP client post request. So now we'll say that this post will return a data type of user model at the moment, and I'm not sure. We'll define it actually like this. And this post take 3 parameters. So we have 2 mandatory, and the third one is optional parameter. So the first parameter is the base URL. That's in which server we will make the call, the request. Actually, we'll say it will be the API/users, and eventually the data model to send in the body of the request. And we need to define the header in order to say that the content of the body, it will be JSON data type. So here we need to make HTTP option, and which contain the headers type of new HTTP headers, and in this headers we'll make the content type like application/JSON data type. That's great. And finally we need to add this parameter in the third option of post method. So in the sign up component .ts we need to import the service, It's really like a C# injection, dependency injection. So we need to import the server, and in the constructor we need to add this dependency like a private. Something great here, we don't need to create a private property which called user service and inject the service in the constructor and initialize this private property. So Angular here make this for you. We don't need to make a private property. This something awesome that does not exist in the C#. So now in the onSubmit method on the signup component, we need to use the register, the user service.register, and we'll simply take the sign up form.value, and in the subscribe, after doing the request, after the success of this request, will make redirection to the login component. So the login component, this redirection, in order to make this redirection, we need to import the router. So the router will make the navigation to a new path or new URL simply, and we have to inject it in the constructor private router type of router class, and the subscribe callback is say this .router.navigate, and we'll pass an array of paths. We'll take simply /sign up component. Eventually you have to make, let's say, sign in component, sorry. So in the app model.js, we need to import a package HTTP, and we'll use simply the HttpClient model, and we have to add it to the import array in order to make the dependency injection on the other component. That's nice. Eventually you need to make the sign in component I have already generated, and here we need to import it and make a new path in the router array. Let's say here the sign in path, and in the navigation bar let's make sure that the router link is /sign in. That's great. Let's try our forms now. Make some fake data and let's click. Oops. So here we have the server has not find the matching request. So here what we make, we need to add a proxy config file .gzone. So it's .gs, it's not, I think it's .gzone, it's configuration, yeah. Why we do this? Because we have two different site web. The presentation layer, the AngularJS, it's hosted on Node.js server, and the WebAPI is hosted on ASP.NET Core server. So we can't make a cross request directly. We have to make some configuration. So here we need to relaunch the server with proxy config command, which take the parameter of proxyconf.gzone file, and let's make our call here. Let's try. I think that's great, and let's click on the sign up. Yeah, that's cool. Here we have our site our forms work correctly. Thank you very much. We see you on the next tutorial, login and validation for all fields.